A girl was pushed into a corral by a group of malicious friends where an aggressively notorious horse awaited. But instead of attacking, the horse did something else, leaving everyone stunned in silent disbelief. It was a crisp, tranquil dawn, the kind that kissed the skin with a light mist and carried whispers of the countryside. Hannah, 16 years old and already bearing the marks of hard work on her hands, walked barefoot across the damp earth of the barnyard. Each step landed softly, echoing a calm rhythm as the sun timidly peeked over the horizon. She paused at the weathered wooden gate of the corral, resting her forehead against its frame, closing her eyes. She took a deep breath. The scent of hay, wet soil, and aged leather wrapped around her like a familiar embrace, grounding her in the moment. "I don't understand why you choose this over the town square," her aunt had once said, shaking her head in exasperation. Hannah had simply smiled, offering no reply. No one ever understood that for Hannah, every horse carried a story, a spirit. In the pounding hooves and flowing manes, she found a peace that no conversation or laughter from the other girls in town could offer. The barn was waking up now. The soft nickering of horses and the rustle of hay signaled the start of the day's work. In the distance, the faint chatter of boys reached her ears, a sound she knew all too well. They were always laughing, often at her expense. "Well, barn princess, when are you going to stop smelling like horses and start smelling like perfume?" The mocking voice of Henry, the oldest in the group, cut through the morning stillness. The others burst into laughter, their collective jeers slicing through Hannah's patience like a blade. She turned to face them, her gaze steady and unwavering. "I'd rather smell like freedom than the fear you all carry with you," she shot back without hesitation. A tense silence fell, thick and charged like the air before a storm. Henry's eyes narrowed in surprise, and the other boys shifted uncomfortably, caught between Hannah's defiance and the sting of her words. There was something different about her that day, a spark that refused to be extinguished, a resolve they hadn't expected. The scraping sound of a horse's hoof against the ground broke the tension, as if even the animals sensed the shift. Gradually, the boys scattered, retreating with nervous chuckles to their tasks. But Hannah knew the reprieve was temporary, a deceptive calm before the storm. Watching them from the corner of her eye as they walked away, she noticed Henry leaning in to whisper something to one of the others. She clenched her jaw and returned to her work, her fingers trailing gently through the mane of a chestnut mare. The warmth of the horse's body and the steady thrum of its heartbeat beneath her touch offered a fleeting comfort as the sun climbed higher into the sky, pouring golden light over the barn. An uneasy shadow clung to Hannah like a second skin. Her ears picked up snippets of laughter and sidelong glances from the boys, warning signs she had learned to recognize over the years. They were plotting something. She could feel it in the way their hushed voices and conspiratorial looks coiled around the air. The tension settled like a knot in her stomach as she continued her routine. Hours dragged on, and the unease only deepened. The boys moved like shadows through the barn, their sly smiles and whispered exchanges sending ripples of unease through her. Hannah crouched beside a soft-coated bay mare, working with practiced determination though her heart raced with every stifled laugh she overheard. The mare, accustomed to Hannah's gentle hands, snorted softly, lowering its head for one last stroke before Hannah stood. The nagging feeling of unrest gnawed at her. The wind carried with it the rustle of dry leaves and something intangible, something heavy and foreboding that set her nerves on edge. What are they up to now? She wondered, wiping her hands on her linen apron as she straightened. The boys were nowhere in sight, but their laughter lingered, echoing faintly off the barn walls like the distant rumble of a storm. Then she heard it, the unmistakable rhythm of boots pounding against the ground. Turning her head just in time, she saw Tom, the youngest of the group, sprinting toward her, his eyes wide, his face flushed with urgency. "Hannah, hurry! Something's wrong with one of the horses," a breathless voice called out, the words tumbling over each other in panic. Hannah felt her chest tighten as an instinctive wave of worry washed over her. The way the boy's hands moved, combined with the urgency in his eyes, seemed genuine, but something about the tremor in his voice planted a seed of doubt. "Who is it?" she asked cautiously, brushing a strand of brown hair from her forehead. Tom, still catching his breath, gestured toward the paddock on the far side of the yard. "I'm not sure, but you have to come now." The urgency in his tone pushed her to move, though a knot of mistrust twisted in her gut. Her ingrained sense of duty, however, was stronger, urging her to follow him without hesitation. With long, purposeful strides, Hannah crossed the yard as the setting sun cast elongated shadows across the ground. The whispering leaves and the crunch of hay beneath her boots accompanied her every step. From a distance, a group of boys watched from behind the barn, half hidden, their grins betraying the mischief they were about to unleash. None dared to make a sound, holding their breath as Hannah followed Tom toward the farthest part of the stable where Titan's enclosure awaited, a striking white stallion of renown. Tom stopped abruptly in front of Titan's paddock. Hannah, her pulse quickening, tried to suppress the unease building within her. The stallion stood on the other side of the fence, his luminous white coat gleaming in the fading light, his dark eyes alert and calculating. His ears twitched, swiveling to catch every sound while his nostrils flared, taking in the scent of unfamiliar visitors. "Tom, what's wrong with Titan?" Hannah asked, her voice steady though a thread of unease wove through her words. The boy avoided her gaze, looking at the ground instead, and that was enough to deepen her suspicions. Before she could react, a sharp metallic sound rang out behind her, the unmistakable clink of a bolt sliding into place, and the door slammed shut. Laughter erupted behind her, sharp and mocking. "Let's see how the princess handles her princely steed now," Henry jeered, his voice brimming with ridicule. The other boys joined in, their faces alight with a blend of amusement and anticipation. Hannah turned toward the paddock, her heart plummeting. She was trapped. Fear clawed its way up from her stomach, tightening her throat and constricting her chest. Titan snorted, shaking his thick mane with abrupt movements. Hannah knew the stallion's reputation all too well. No one but Mr. Ignacio dared to handle him without a solid barrier in place. And now here she was, heat radiating from her fear-stricken body as the horse's unyielding gaze bore into her. "What did you do, Henry?" Hannah whispered, though her voice was lost amidst the laughter that began to fade as the boys retreated, still watching her from a safe distance. A flash of memory struck her, a moment months ago when Pedro, one of the stable hands, had made the fatal mistake of testing Titan's temper. Overconfident and reckless, Pedro had approached the stallion from behind while he was distracted. The result had been devastating. Titan, startled, lashed out with a powerful kick, leaving Pedro with a shattered leg and months of recovery. Horses never forget what scares them. Mr. Ignacio's deep voice echoed in her mind. She could still picture his weathered hands as he cleaned the reins that day. "Treat them with respect and calm, or you'll pay the price." Those words rang in her ears now, a distant echo grounding her in the present. The heat of her fear transformed into something else, a fierce determination. She lifted her chin, planting her feet firmly on the ground. Losing control was not an option. She knew that any sudden movement or impulsive action could provoke Titan's wild instincts. The stallion took a step forward, lowering his massive head in a gesture that carried a strange curiosity. Titan's ears tilted slightly forward, catching every sound, every shift in Hannah's breathing as she fought to remain steady. Each thud of her heartbeat echoed in her ears, but a quiet determination rose within her chest. Instinct whispered to her, urging calmness, advising her to make each movement deliberate and assured. Hannah, hyper-aware of every detail, every gesture, every signal she might convey to the animal, took a deep breath, letting the air fill her lungs and soothe the trembling in her hands. She kept her arms at her sides, resisting the urge to raise them or move too quickly. Don't show fear, she reminded herself silently, recalling Don Ignacio's words. Horses pick up on everything inside you. If you give them peace, they'll return it, but if you give them fear, they'll magnify it. Titan took another step forward, now only a few feet from her. Hannah could see the gleam in his dark eyes, a glint that held both caution and curiosity. In that gaze was a spark of something deeper, something she'd never seen before, even after years of working with horses. It felt as if Titan recognized something in her, something familiar that made him lower his guard even if just slightly. Across the paddock, the boys watched in stunned silence, their earlier laughter muted as their eyes locked onto the unfolding scene. Henry, always the ringleader of these pranks, bit his lip, a mix of nerves and astonishment flitting across his face. None of them had expected Hannah to stand her ground, to meet Titan's gaze without flinching or stepping back. They had been certain she would falter, that fear would drive her away, and that the towering presence of the horse would overwhelm her. But what was happening now was something they couldn't grasp. Without breaking her gaze, Hannah slowly raised one hand, her movements fluid and deliberate. Her fingers were outstretched, empty, her intent transparent. "I'm here, Titan," her gesture seemed to say, "and I mean you no harm." Their eyes met, and for a moment time itself seemed to pause. Titan let out a quiet snort, shaking his mane and stirring the dust around them as if he too felt the tension thickening the air. Yet he didn't retreat. Instead, he tilted his head slightly toward her, his ears swiveling in her direction as he stretched his neck to close the distance. The fine hairs of his muzzle brushed against Hannah's outstretched hand, and she held her breath, knowing that any sudden movement could shatter the delicate connection. Her eyes shone with a mixture of awe and reverence, the weight of the moment pressing down on her like a revelation. In that instant, she felt she had touched something profound, something beyond words or teachings. It was as though she and Titan shared an unspoken understanding, a quiet truce that needed no explanation. She knew she wasn't merely standing before an animal. She faced a being with emotions, fears, and dreams of his own, a soul that like hers had learned to be wary. "It's okay, friend," she murmured, her voice soft and steady like the gentlest of breezes. The words came out as barely a whisper, yet Titan seemed to understand. He didn't pull back or shy away. On the contrary, he pressed his nose more firmly into her palm as if exploring the texture of her skin, as if recognizing something familiar in her presence. From their vantage point, the boys exchanged bewildered glances. Their expressions, once filled with mockery and smug anticipation, now reflected confusion and disbelief. They couldn't comprehend how this was possible, how Titan, the horse known for his guarded and aloof demeanor, was approaching Hannah with such trust. Henry's brow furrowed, his lips curling into a frustrated grimace as his hands gripped the edge of the fence in a mix of irritation and fascination. How is she doing that?" one of the boys whispered, his voice filled with incredulity. No one answered. The truth wasn't something that could be put into words. It was there in the silent bond unfolding between the girl and the stallion. After what felt like an eternity, Titan lowered his head, his posture relaxing. Hannah accepted the gesture as if it were a gift, a quiet offering of trust. She seized the moment, her hand moving gently across his forehead, absorbing the warmth and strength that radiated from him. It was an almost sacred act, a silent communion between two beings who, at their core, understood each other without needing words. "Thank you, Titan," she whispered, her fingers brushing through his mane with reverence. In that instant, she felt an unexpected surge of strength and confidence. She realized that even if things didn't change with the boys or the challenges continued, she would always have this moment, this proof that respect and calmness could triumph over fear. The boys, meanwhile, began to step back, their bravado dissipating. The prank they had planned had taken a turn they hadn't anticipated. What was supposed to humiliate Hannah had transformed into something they couldn't quite comprehend. They watched, unsure of what to make of the scene unfolding before them. In the end, they slinked away in silence, carrying with them a lesson they might not fully grasp for years to come. Hannah remained beside Titan, who now stood with his head lowered, his posture relaxed as if at peace in her presence. Yet for her, the moment wasn't over. With a blend of boldness and respect, she let her hands glide along the strong curve of his neck, feeling the tension in his muscles melt beneath her touch. A sudden impulse welled up inside her, a longing to experience his power more intimately. She had never dared to ride him before, especially not a horse as imposing as Titan, but something inside her stirred, urging her forward. It wasn't just a whim. It felt like a calling, as though Titan himself was inviting her. His deep, calm eyes conveyed a trust she had never seen before. Cautiously, Hannah stepped onto the makeshift stirrup of the nearby fence, holding onto his thick mane. She swung herself up in one fluid motion, landing atop Titan's back. Her body trembled at first, her hands gripping tightly as she felt the rhythmic rise and fall of his breathing beneath her. Every nerve in her body was on high alert, yet an unexpected joy surged through her, a heady mix of adrenaline and wonder at the unknown. Titan didn't flinch or resist. Instead, he accepted her weight with a dignified calm, taking a deliberate step forward to test the ground. Then slowly, he began to walk. Each of his steps echoed like a drumbeat in the midday sun, and Hannah felt the world around them expand, as though the corral could no longer contain the bond they had forged. The boys who hadn't yet completely left froze in their tracks. Their mocking expressions gave way to wide-eyed amazement. What they saw now wasn't the stable girl they had ridiculed countless times, but someone transformed, stronger, steadier, riding atop the powerful stallion they had all secretly feared. Hannah was aware of their stares but paid them no mind. Her entire focus was on Titan, on the rhythm of his movements and the exhilarating sense of freedom swelling in her chest. For the first time, she felt truly connected, not just to the horse beneath her but to a part of herself that had been waiting to emerge. As they reached the edge of the corral, she pressed her legs gently, signaling Titan to stop. He obeyed immediately, smiling. She leaned forward and stroked his neck, whispering words only for him to hear. Though he didn't respond with words, the way he turned his head and nuzzled her hand spoke volumes. The gesture filled Hannah with a deep, heartfelt joy. Then a familiar sound broke her reverie. From the entrance of the barn came the steady, deliberate footsteps of Mr. Hexen, the owner of the ranch. His weathered face, lined with years of experience, bore a mixture of astonishment and a trace of pride. He had been watching from a distance and now approached, his keen eyes taking in every detail of Hannah and Titan. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and filled with respect. "What you've done here isn't a small thing, Hannah," he said, lowering her gaze, a faint blush coloring her cheeks though her eyes sparkled with a hint of satisfaction. "I did it because I felt like he allowed me to," she said softly, struggling to articulate the deep, unspoken connection she had felt with Titan. Mr. Hexen nodded slowly, understanding her without the need for further explanation. He turned his gaze toward the boys who still stood awkwardly, unsure of how to respond. His expression hardened into one of stern authority. "You," he said firmly, his voice carrying weight, "planned a prank without considering the consequences. What you did was reckless and dangerous, not just for Hannah but for Titan as well. Animals are not toys, and respect for them is something you must never forget." The boys lowered their heads, shame washing over them. Some murmured quiet apologies, but Mr. Hexen wasn't finished. "Starting tomorrow, Each of you will spend extra hours in the stables caring for and cleaning up after the animals. That's how you'll learn the true meaning of respect and responsibility." His words were sharp, leaving no room for argument, and the boys nodded solemnly, accepting their reprimand without protest. Hannah watched the scene unfold, a quiet sense of peace settling over her. She knew this moment was more than just a lesson for the boys. It was one for all of them, herself included. Riding Titan and earning his trust had awakened something inside her, something that made her feel stronger and more self-assured. As the boys trudged away, weighed down by their impending punishment, Hannah dismounted Titan carefully once again, thanking him for the trust he had shown her. Mr. Hexon stepped closer, placing a firm yet gentle hand on her shoulder. "You have a gift, Hannah," he said warmly. "It's not something everyone has." Hannah smiled, a soft warmth blooming in her chest. Mr. Hex's words affirmed what she had always sensed deep within herself. Her connection with animals, her love and respect for them was more than a simple fondness. It was a part of who she was, something that defined her. In the days that followed the unexpected event in the corral, a subtle shift began to take place in the stables. The boys who had once laughed loudly and played rough jokes now passed Hannah with different expressions, some curious, others tinged with a quiet respect. They didn't quite know how to show a new dynamic took root, a cautious distance that gradually softened over time. The routine of the stables, once lively with echoes of their laughter and games, grew quieter. Hannah moved through the aisles with her usual calm precision, her focus unwavering, yet she could feel their eyes following her, watching with a newfound attentiveness. One afternoon, Henry, who had often led the teasing, approached her hesitantly as she brushed the mane of a mare. "Hannah, hey," he began, clearing his throat awkwardly. "What happened that day with Titan? It was stupid, really stupid on our part." His voice, though steady, carried an uncharacteristic note of regret. Hannah paused, the bristles of the brush stilled in her hand. "I know, Henry," she replied gently, her tone soft but firm. She turned to look at him, noticing the nervous way he fidgeted with the buckle of his belt. "And I know you didn't mean any harm, but there are things you just don't mess around with." He nodded slowly, his gaze dropping briefly before meeting hers again. A quiet moment settled between them, broken only by the mare's soft snort. Gradually, the other boys began to gather nearby, their expressions uncertain but expectant, as if waiting for a sign that things could return to normal, only this time a better, kinder normal. "Why are you so into horses?" Hannah asked one of the younger boys, Harry. His tone laced not with mockery this time, but with genuine curiosity. Hannah sighed, allowing the flood of memories to surface. The stable had always been more than just a workplace for her. It was a sanctuary, a haven that provided the comfort her house never could. "When I was a little girl, my mom used to bring me here," she began, her voice tinged with a soft nostalgia. "She'd say that horses can sense what's inside us, that they know how to listen without judgment. After she passed away, these animals were the only part of her I had left. Here in the stable, I feel like I can still hear her. Her advice, like the wind through the pastures, carries her words back to me." The boys listened in silence, each affected in their own way by the weight of her words. The air in the stable grew warmer, more intimate. Henry, who had never truly experienced a loss so profound, felt a sharp pang in his chest, a newfound respect for the girl he had underestimated for so long. "You know," Hannah continued, steering the conversation away from its heavy tone, "caring for horses isn't easy. It takes patience, and it reminds me that life does too. Not everything happens quickly or effortlessly. Learning to wait, that's one of the lessons these horses teach me every day." "We could help more," Harry offered with a shy smile, his sincerity evident. "Not just the easy stuff, really help." Hannah smiled and nodded. It wasn't the kind of offer she had expected, but something in the way they had looked at her, listened to her, made her realize she had taken a step closer to them, and they to her. In the days that followed, the boys began working alongside her. At first, their efforts were clumsy, riddled with small mistakes, but over time, their help became more earnest, more reliable. Hannah, who had always preferred the quiet companionship of horses, found herself growing accustomed to their voices, their occasional laughter, and the questions they tossed her way as they cleaned stalls or fetched water for the animals. One evening as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Hannah led Titan, the stallion, to a nearby meadow. The trust between them had grown so deeply that their time together was no longer marked by the tension of those early days. Watching from a distance, the boys grew curious, drawn by the quiet bond Hannah seemed to share with the horse. "How did you get him to trust you?" Henry asked, his voice a mix of admiration and wonder. Hannah stroked Titan's forehead, the horse responding with a low snort and a flick of his ears. "It didn't happen overnight," she replied, her gaze never leaving the animal. "It was slow, built over time with patience, like any true friendship." The boys fell silent, realizing that Hannah's lesson wasn't just about caring for a horse. It was about life itself. From that day forward, they not only worked together but also laughed and shared stories. Their friendship grew naturally, rooted in mutual respect and understanding. The stable, once just a workplace filled with the echoes of mocking laughter and the crunch of boots on dry dirt, began to change. It became warmer, more human. The transformation wasn't instant, but the seeds of camaraderie and respect Hannah had sown with her courage and dedication began to bloom. Mr. Hexon, the stable's owner, was always present, a constant figure with sharp, watchful eyes that had witnessed many seasons come and go. He had seen the boys join Hannah in her tasks, watched as arguments diminished and laughter grew more genuine, free of malice. He knew it was time to reinforce the lesson they had all, himself included, learned. One late afternoon as the sun cast a golden glow over the barn, painting it in warm amber hues, the soft snorts of horses filled the air. Mr. Hexon gathered the kids and Hannah beneath the weathered wooden roof, the gentle rustling of leaves and faint movements of the animals their only backdrop. "Today, I want to talk about what it truly means to be here," he began, his deep, steady voice capturing everyone's attention. "This place isn't just where we take care of horses. It's where we learn to be better, not just for ourselves but for those around us." The kids exchanged glances, some lowering their heads as they remembered their own past missteps. Hannah, standing beside Titan, listened intently. Her heartbeat was calm but resolute, her gaze steady. "Hannah has taught us a lesson," Mr. Hexon continued, his eyes moving across the group. "She's shown us that trust and patience can transform everything. She's not only earned Titan's respect but ours as well." A murmur of agreement rippled through the group. Henry, once the most stubborn and mischievous of the bunch, raised his head and gave a small nod, a hint of a smile playing on his lips, a gesture that Hannah returned lightly but genuinely. The barn seemed to reflect the shift in the air, and among its walls, the kids who once vied to crack the sharpest joke or evade the toughest chores now worked side by side, sharing stories and advice that made the long days feel shorter. Unknowingly, Hannah had become a pillar not just for the younger ones but even for the seasoned workers who had spent years at the barn. They looked at her with a blend of admiration and warmth, recognizing in her the dedication some had lost over time. Titan, the once fiery stallion known for his untamed spirit, now walked beside Hannah with a calmness that amazed everyone there. There was a silent understanding between them, a bond forged through time and mutual respect. Even the other horses seemed to relax in Titan's presence, as though his transformation resonated throughout the barn. "It seems like Titan's grown soft," Harry remarked one evening while brushing a gray mare. The group laughed, but the laughter held no mockery, only affection and a shared camaraderie. "It's because he knows there's someone who understands him now," Hannah replied, her hands gently stroking Titan's mane. Her words lingered in the air, met with nods and knowing smiles. As time passed, the barn became more than just a place to work. It evolved into a community where people cared for one another. Petty squabbles were settled with words, not pranks, and chores were completed with a collective effort. Mr. Hexen watched this transformation with quiet satisfaction, knowing the harmony they had achieved wasn't easy to come by. One morning, with the sun high and the mountains casting long shadows over the fields, Mr. Hexen approached Hannah as she cleaned the feeding troughs. "You've done more for this place than most do in a lifetime," he said, his voice tinged with rare emotion. Startled by the weight of his words, Hannah looked up. "I just did what felt right," she answered with her characteristic humility. "And that," Mr. Hexen replied, resting a hand on her shoulder, "is exactly what makes all the difference." The change in the barn didn't go unnoticed by visitors. They remarked on the warmth and unity that seemed to permeate the air, often asking about the young woman with an uncanny gift for connecting with both people and horses. The story of Hannah and Titan spread throughout the town, a tale of transformation that reached beyond the barn's walls. Titan's loyalty to Hannah remained steadfast. His calm demeanor was a living testament to the bond they shared, a connection so deep it seemed unbreakable no matter the challenges they faced. Whenever Hannah approached, Titan would whinny softly, his once tense body now visibly relaxed in her presence. Their story was no longer just about a horse and his trainer, but about the power of trust, patience, and the quiet strength of a shared understanding. The boys, now more mature, saw Hannah as someone worth following and respecting. Their friendship had transformed into an unbreakable bond woven together through genuine laughter, shared struggles, and the unwavering belief that together they could achieve far more than they ever imagined. The future of the stable had never looked brighter under the steady and wise leadership of Mr. Hexen and the inspiration Hannah brought with her. The stable became a place of learning and growth for everyone involved. As the seasons passed, the work remained tough, but the atmosphere was infused with a deep sense of belonging and a respect that wasn't just earned but nurtured day by day. The stable thrived not merely as a place to care for horses, but as a true home where every individual from the youngest newcomer to the most seasoned veteran understood that real strength wasn't found solely in skill, but in compassion and unity. Hannah's journey at the stable is a profound tale of transformation both for herself and for those around her. What stands out most is how through patience and unwavering dedication she managed not only to earn the trust of Titan, the formidable stallion, but also to change the attitudes and behaviors of the boys who had once underestimated her. Hannah embodies the very essence of empathy and resilience, qualities that allowed her to face challenges head-on and prove that true leadership isn't about exerting power, but about fostering respect and understanding. The bond between Hannah and Titan lies at the heart of this story, representing the triumph over fear and the foundation of trust. Their connection illustrates that true communication often transcends words, and that the strongest relationships are built through mutual understanding and patience. Hannah's ability to inspire those around her transformed a place once marked by rivalry into one of collaboration and friendship, highlighting the profound impact a single person can have on an entire community. Through kindness and positive influence, the most valuable lesson from this story is that empathy and perseverance can overcome even the toughest barriers, those that seem impossible to break. Hannah reminds us that authentic leadership is forged in moments when we choose to be both brave and compassionate, inspiring those around us to do the same. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and share it. Leave a comment to tell us how it inspired you, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. May God bless and guide you every step of the way.